Join us on a deep dive into the Pacific theater of World War II, where the United States and Japan waged a brutal and historic conflict. In this video, we explore the key battles, strategies, and turning points that define the Pacific War, from the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor to the devastating atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The roots of the Pacific War stretch back decades. Japan, a rising empire with ambitions of expansion, saw the vast territories of East Asia and the Pacific as its rightful domain. In the early 20th century, Japan's victories against China and Russia bolstered its confidence. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and later, full-scale war with China in 1937 showed Japan's hunger for power. But there was a problem. The United States, with its significant interest in the Pacific, viewed Japan's aggressive moves with growing concern. As Japan continued its conquests, America responded with economic sanctions, cutting off vital supplies like oil and steel. For Japan, these sanctions felt like a noose tightening around their empire. The decision was made. Japan would strike first, hoping to cripple the American military before it could intervene. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In just 2 hours, more than 2,400 Americans were killed, and a significant portion of the fleet was either sunk or damaged. The attack was a tactical victory for Japan, but it was also a strategic blunder. Instead of knocking the United States out of the war, Pearl Harbor galvanized American resolve. The very next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress, calling it a date which will live in infamy, and the United States declared war on Japan. The Pacific War had begun. In the months following Pearl Harbor, Japan seemed unstoppable. They quickly seized the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. Their strategy was simple: take control of key islands and territories across the Pacific, creating a defensive perimeter that would be nearly impossible for the Allies to penetrate. The Japanese were fierce and determined, believing in the divine right of their emperor and the superiority of their nation. They were willing to fight to the death to defend the territories they had captured. For a time, it seemed like the Japanese Empire might actually achieve its goal of dominating the Pacific. But the tide was about to turn. The Battle of Midway, fought from June 4th to 7th, 1942, marked a critical turning point in the Pacific War. The United States, having cracked Japanese codes, knew the attack was coming and prepared a deadly ambush. In a fierce and chaotic battle, American pilots managed to sink 4 of Japan's fleet carriers, the same carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor. It was a devastating blow to the Japanese Navy, from which they would never fully recover. Midway shifted the balance of power in the Pacific, giving the United States and its allies the upper hand. After Midway, the United States adopted a strategy known as island hopping. Instead of trying to recapture every Japanese-held island, the Americans targeted key locations, bypassing heavily fortified positions and cutting off Japanese forces from supplies and reinforcements. This strategy led to some of the most brutal battles of the Pacific War. Places like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima became synonymous with sacrifice and heroism. The fighting was intense, with soldiers facing not only a determined enemy but also the harsh conditions of the Pacific: sweltering heat, dense jungles, and treacherous terrain. Each island captured brought the Allies closer to Japan itself, but the cost was high. Thousands of lives were lost, and the psychological toll on both sides was immense. While the ground forces fought their way across the Pacific, the air war over Japan intensified. American B-29 bombers, known as super fortresses, began launching massive bombing raids against Japanese cities. The goal was to cripple Japan's war industry and break the will of the Japanese people. The most devastating of these raids came on the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, when American bombers dropped incendiary bombs on Tokyo. The resulting firestorm killed over 100,000 people and destroyed much of the city. Similar raids were carried out against other major cities, causing widespread devastation and bringing the war to the Japanese homeland. Despite the destruction, Japan refused to surrender. The government, led by military hardliners, was determined to fight on, even as the situation grew increasingly desperate. The Battle of Okinawa, fought from April to June 1945, was the last major battle of the Pacific War. It was also one of the bloodiest. American forces faced fierce resistance from Japanese soldiers who were entrenched in a network of caves and bunkers. The battle resulted in over 200,000 casualties, including a large number of civilians. Okinawa brought the war to Japan's doorstep, but the Japanese leadership still refused to surrender. With the prospect of a costly invasion of Japan looming, the United States made a fateful decision. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destructive power of these bombs was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and the cities were reduced to rubble. The bombings forced Japan to face the reality of total annihilation. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, bringing an end to World War II. The Pacific War was over, but its impact would be felt for generations. The conflict had claimed millions of lives and left much of the Pacific region in ruins. For Japan, the war's end marked the beginning of a long and painful recovery, as the country rebuilt from the ashes and transformed into a peaceful and prosperous nation. For the United States, the war solidified its position as a global superpower, with a dominant presence in the Pacific. The memories of battles like Pearl Harbor, Midway, and Iwo Jima became etched into the American consciousness, shaping the nation's identity for decades to come. The Pacific War was a brutal, complex conflict driven by ideologies, ambitions, and the sheer determination of those who fought. It was a clash of giants, where the fate of nations hung in the balance, and where the course of history was forever altered. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most significant conflicts of the 20th century. The Pacific War was more than just a battle between the United States and Japan. It was a struggle that reshaped the world. If you want to learn more about World War II, make sure to subscribe to WW2 Insight, where we dive deep into the stories, strategies, and people who lived through this monumental time in history.